Hey, in this video, I want to talk about surrender, what it means, what we're surrendering to, and why it's so important. As you're probably aware, I'm hosting an online retreat this weekend titled Surrender, and the subtitle is Collapsing into Truth, which I'm not sure how that's resonating with people, but I personally really like it, as I think it perfectly captures what's happening in a moment of surrender. So I want to give you a little bit more detail about what we're going to be exploring here, and also just give you some teaching around this topic, even if you can't attend. But if you are interested, the link is in the bio, and there's a few more hours, 24 more hours to sign up. So, surrender. To really start to round out the conversation or enter into the conversation of what this is pointing to, we have to really ask the question of what is being surrendered to? Because otherwise this can easily just be like pop spirituality, or we can just get caught up in I'm going to follow my gut or follow what feels good. And that's it's a high level teaching, but often distributed in a very low level one-dimensional way, because we can easily point to all of the ways where we follow something that feels good or has some pleasure associated with it, but actually reinforces many patterns in our life that aren't serving us. I mean, there's just endless examples of that, and I've gotten caught in that as well. And so if we really want to have a serious and honest conversation about what surrender is, why it's powerful, and how it can actually be a guiding force for your life, the thing that brings you closer to yourself and that you can trust on a moment-to-moment basis to guide you to your deepest, fullest, most alive expression, we have to drop a layer deeper. For that, we have to take the stance that there is something within you, a place within you that is fundamentally more free and complete than the place within us that we are typically making decisions from and operating our life around. If you follow my teachings, you know I tend to distinguish these two between the ego structure, the ego voice, and the soul voice, or sometimes we might even call it intuitive guidance. This stance is another one of those things that you can have some pushback on, where it's like, all right, well, what are those two things? And it sounds a little mystical. And I take the perspective that it's empirically measurable, that you can see for yourself the distinction between these two aspects of yourself. And any contemplative tradition, which, again, what is a contemplative tradition? It's just basically a commitment to look at your experience, to be the researcher of your experience, and to understand the subtleties of what is actually going on in the mind-body system. And you could make an argument that when it comes to actually leading your life, like how to understand how best to lead your life, that might be the highest form of science that could inform how to lead your life, because everything else is kind of just aggregating and sourcing data from groups of people and trying to give you a general sense of, in general, what is good and not good. But it's not directly connected to the lived experience of you that only you can know and that only you can understand the subtleties of, and that in any given moment only you can feel into the different layers that would be contributing how to actually lead into a moment that is in a place that is in alignment with a place within you that is coming from spaciousness and freedom rather than contraction or mental positions and ideas. And so contemplative traditions take the perspective that there's a way to find freedom in your life, inner freedom, where you are not bound and tossed around by the torment of the mind-body dilemma. That dilemma essentially being that you are put in form and you're constantly grasping for some form of predictability, understanding, safety, for things to make sense, which is never going to happen because everything's always changing. It's always in flux. Who you are is changing, the outside world is changing, and yet we have this ego structure, this set of beliefs that's trying to figure it out in a very young way of how to show up and make it all make sense. And so that can keep us safe and protected. It can help us maybe make decisions that get us praise, or maybe like hold on to someone so they don't leave us, or get us a job that follows a script that checks off certain boxes, and you can live your life like that. And you can have a pretty decent life like that. You might make a ton of money, you might stumble into a relationship that works well for you, you might live in a beautiful location. So you can't demonize that entirely. But it's not the foolproof way to getting to the deepest kind of fulfillment, the deepest kind of sense of completeness, where there is just a stillness in your being, that there's no questioning of your right to be here right now, and a sense of like, I am living my life on the fullest, deepest, most true, aligned frequency that I can. Because the ego structure can't take you there. The reason it can't take you there, the reason those beliefs and ideas can't take you there, is because their fundamental origin is from the place of feeling disconnected from that sense of wholeness and completeness. And where the contemplative traditions come in is that they're basically saying, like, your idea of yourself, while helpful for interacting with one another, I'm me, you're you, we kind of use that to have conversation, is just a bit of a delusion that gets created and reinforced through being in human form. Again, this can sound a little out there, so just stay with me. But when you do these practices that help you drop beneath that, where you're not reinforcing that narrative of I'm Corey, I'm great, this is what I'm working toward, this is going to be the thing, that takes me all the way into my life. When you do something like, let's just say, meditation, which is where my background has been in, and you just, like, instead of fueling that, you let it be there. Maybe you anchor your attention somewhere on the breath or just in awareness itself. You really start to see that that is just very much a story. There's no aspect of that you can point to and say, like, that's me. If it was, you'd just be being born and dying with every thought that arises, every emotion that comes and goes, every sensation that passes through your awareness. So, like, what in that can we point to and say, like, that's me, or that's my truth, or that that's the thing that's going to guide my life and take me all the way? You can't. It's fundamentally unpredictable. It's fundamentally untrustworthy from the perspective of just being able to follow and be guided by these fleeting things moving through us. And so you get to connect to, through these practices where you drop beneath that, is that there's a place in you that is more still. And as you get there, there's just a deeper and deeper sense of feeling connected to something bigger. The sense of duality starts to dissolve as well. You do see that there's like a fundamental interconnectedness between you and all that is here. And the more you connect to that, the more you start to feel a sense of freedom. The more you start to feel a sense of like, oh, I am deeply okay. And I am deeply protected. Not in a sense of like my body can't get hurt, but that I am bigger. My identity is bigger than the thoughts and the sensations and the emotions that are moving through me. And it often has this feeling of like invincibility, where it's just like, oh, all these things are here, but I just see so clearly that I am not that. It doesn't mean it doesn't have an impact on you in the world. Like these things, pain, it's all still real in human form, but it's not the whole story. And so the freedom that is attained in contemplative practice is by shifting the point of identity from the paint that's on the canvas to, you could say, the canvas itself, the space around. And so if we start there, that there's like a place behind all of that we can drop into, and that the closer we get to that place, the more ourselves we start to feel, the more free we start to feel, the more inherently fulfilled we start to feel, the more we touch into like love and spaciousness and open and just like the timeless quality of being alive. Just like, I am here. I'm here in my life. I feel my life. Then it makes sense, even very logically, that if we can lead our life more from that place, or in a way that is bringing us closer to that place moment by moment by moment, that would be a way of orienting to our life that, in a sense, is almost foolproof. Foolproof from the perspective of, if I just did that, I would be getting closer and closer to the very thing that I most crave in my life. All this other stuff you're doing, relationship, the house, the job, they're just ideas that the mind has externalized and said, and that it uses as things to grab onto as the thing that's going to take us to that deepest place. It takes some time to start to see that clearly, but it's not that interested in those things. It's more interested in what it perceives those things can get us. And that's why there's such profundity in these contemplative practices, is they just take you directly to that source. And this was, I think, the thing that really inspired me on my path when I was around 20, 21 years old, was just a clear seeing of like, there's all these things I want, but I actually really don't know if that's going to take me to the place that I most desire. And I just wanted to figure out, what is the thing on the deepest level that I want? How can I understand what that is? Is there a way to get that first, or just be more clear on how to get that and then reverse engineer my life from there? And I figured out a lot how to do that in practice, in meditation. Give me a monastery and people that are taking care of all my basic needs. And I can access that pretty deeply, get into very deep states of concentration, really access a deep inner freedom and peace that, in my experience, is the happiest I've ever been. Bring that into the world, where there's noise, there's agitation, there's distraction, and this human form is interacting with a lot around it, it gets a little bit more complicated. That is where I've found surrender to really be the deeper thing that I'm interested in terms of how to take awakening from the mat into life, and also where I've been challenged on the deepest levels to actually surrender in a way that is just way harder than when you're meditating. It's still really hard. If you go on a retreat and you're meditating 12 hours a day, 10 hours a day, it's just like, oh, now I can surrender. Good luck. I mean, there's just so many barriers we have to holding on, all our ideas of like how to do it good, how to be good, what happens if I let go, what happens if I let go of my identity. So let's not minimize just the role of that path. But in my experience, it's just another thing to do it in the world. And so, right, we take the stance that there's a separation between the way that we're typically operating and something deeper, that there's been thousands and thousands of years of people who have explored this and measured it in the sense of like, it can be replicated, you can see it, more and more people get close to it. Anyone starts to go into this work on these retreats, you're going to follow like a similar path, obviously different for different people depending on their background, but you're going to get closer and closer and closer into this space that people tend to report that feels more me. I feel more open. I feel more connected to source, to oneness, to interconnection, and it feels like the very thing that I've been looking for in my life more than anything else. Cool. So let's just take that at face value, that is a thing. How do we then bring it into our lives? It happens in moments, and it requires first being connected to that place within us, and then seeing all of the subtle ways as we're navigating our life that the ego structure, the human form, contracts around that wisdom when that wisdom is seemingly threatening to something that the ego structure perceives it wants or needs in order to get safety, love, and connection. And that is just the majority of like what's coming into us and how the system is evaluating our life all day long. Like, do this so that I don't get in trouble from my employer, so that I'm not yelled at, and that would create a sense of fear, and fear is associated with being ostracized, and being ostracized is associated with death. Just like you look at every corner, even the most benign things like being late to respond to an email can all like just be reduced to something there that the ego structure fears. Like if that happens, then something bad is going to happen. So we're challenged. We're challenged at every corner where there might be a wisdom that's arising, that's pulling us in a certain direction, that is just like, it's this soft voice in us, and it can show up in a lot of ways. It's still going to express itself through form. So sometimes it shows up even as a thought, but it has a different kind of resonance than a thought that might be like, need to do this, need to do this, need to do this. And it's like arguing yourself into it, and you can feel the contraction around it. Usually when it's coming from this still place, it's just like a cloud passing through the sky. It's like there, it passes. It's not asking you to look at it, it's just presenting itself. And then the emotions that arise, it's like, oh, there's just like an openness when I feel into this, or this next step, or doing this decision, or like taking a break right now, or really putting in a lot of work into this next endeavor. There's just something that feels like spacious and open. And then of course that can quickly be coupled with the ego structure coming in. It's like, wait, but if we do that, then this could happen. And then you feel the contraction, and that's where it gets messy. And so what the process of surrender is the letting go, the collapsing into the truth of that still, quiet voice that is inherent to all of us, that we all have access to, and that's going to express itself through each person in a different way. But when we have our finger on the pulse of it, the closer and closer we are to it, the more there is a sense of like, oh, there's something here. Like there's something about this that just feels correct. And one of my teachers will say that kind of truth, that guidance, that soul voice, it just doesn't have the resonance of being a decision. It doesn't feel like a mental position. It doesn't feel like you're wrestling yourself into something. It's just like a receiving. It's arisen. The decision making, the chewing, the wrestling, that's happening in the mind. That's the ego trying to talk yourself out of it. And as I said the other day in one of my posts, I think most of the mental agitation we experience isn't coming from an untrained mind. It's just our ego constantly at war with our soul. This is a lifelong process. And just because it's a lifelong process doesn't mean it's not the most important thing to endeavor into. Because if we view life as kind of this opportunity to get deeper and deeper into our particular dharma, our particular truth, you could say why we were put here on earth. Not even in a divine way that there's something set out for us that we have to fulfill, but more just the cause and effect unfolding in an unconditioned way that's moving through us, like the actual expression of us that goes beyond the mind and the body. There's just something about knowing that we can't even explain why we want to know that. Because that does come up in contemplative tradition. Like, why do I even feel pulled into stillness? Like, why do I feel pulled to understand my mind? Why do I feel pulled to even understand my suffering and why I'm suffering? Like, what is that actual pull there? And there's something about just knowing ourselves that it's a reward unto itself. And people, if you want to get a little bit more out there, might say, like, consciousness has one of its properties to want to know itself, to see itself. And some will say that, if it is just like one consciousness, we come into form to re-see ourselves and to kind of refine that seeing. So we're like put into the scenario that is particularly complicated, where we seem separate. And the whole thing is like, how do we come back to, through this incredibly complicated system, come back to that deep alignment and connection and sense of oneness. And you've probably experienced this in different ways in your life, where just the system is holding on, it's activated, it's grasping. Maybe you went years and years like playing out a particular script of what you thought you needed to do in order to get the thing you wanted, and you either hit a point where you were just forced to let go, or you just became so exhausted that there was no more capacity to hold on anymore. And it feels like a giving up, because the ego never wants to give up. It just has all these ideas. And so it can even feel like a weakness in that moment. But like through that, something gives, and you just descend and open into this new spaciousness. I think that is why things like AA is so powerful, and different forms of religion are so powerful, because people are using a particular structure and a system, and just they're relinquishing and letting go of their ideas, and just like, I don't know how to guide my life. Like, I've tried. Like, I am just open. And then it's like, God came in, let's say, or whoever your deity is, it's like they came in and they took care of me. Maybe, perhaps a different interpretation could just be that you just let go. And what is there when you do let go is something that catches you, that's always been inherent to you, but you just couldn't access because you were too caught in the ego's ideas for how to live your life and how to control the outcomes. And so if you've tasted those moments of surrender, then you know what this is pointing to, that the sense of space that opens up, the sense of energy that starts to open up, and also a sense of clarity that starts to present itself. Not necessarily in a longitudinal way of just like, oh, this is what the next 8 years of my life are going to look like. Sometimes it does present that way. But a lot of times it's just you've gotten closer to a deeper sense of like, this feels like me. And from that place, the energy to just do and express arises organically. And it's really beautiful. And in those moments, there's no questioning that that's right. Doesn't mean the ego structure doesn't come back in and start to question it. So like, this is where it's like a learning to walk process. We're falling down and coming back up. Or we could say the ego is like the standing up, and then we have to fall down again and let go. But just countless stories from my own life and other people's lives who have done this, where like they finally just release something. They finally just surrender something over. And then all these serendipities start to happen. It's like you get out of a relationship. It's just happened to a friend recently, just like a week ago, just like wrestling with something, and then gets out of his relationship, and just like finally like has one morning, just like wakes up, and he's just like, okay, yeah, I release. And then later in the day, just like walking through town, like meets someone, and it's just like, where did that come from? And so things arrange and open up in ways that you just can't perceive when you're in the place of holding on. The ego can't see it. And this is where I say, like, the universe tends to take care of a surrendered heart, even if it's not the fact that you're taken care of in the sense of like, okay, here's $1 million, here's your dream home, here's everything you thought you wanted. Usually doesn't go like that. It actually never goes like that. I mean, you might get all these wonderful things for sure, but it's not like in the way that your mind perceives. The way it takes care of you is that like you are now on the pulse of truth in your life, and there is nothing more fulfilling and satisfying and a reward than just feeling that deep integrity and alignment with the truest part of you. And so what we're going to be exploring in this weekend's retreat is just the process of connecting to that place and working with all of the prickly edges that prevent us from staying there on a regular basis, especially like the big ones. Sometimes some of us, and I know myself included in this, like we often don't realize we wrestle this until we're like hit with some big event in our life. And then it's like we're just thrust into the most challenging thing that we could experience. And it could be like months and years that we're just navigating that as like our lesson for surrender and letting go. But other times we might explore it on smaller levels, and we just like get to taste it, and we accumulate and develop like the strengthening of that muscle. You could just say like the softening of the ego infrastructure. So I'm going to leave it there for now, because this kind of just like launches us into the content for the retreat. I'll go into that though. If you're interested in this, first off, the biggest question I get is like, I really am interested in the content. Like, I'd love to go into that, but it's either short notice for me or just found out about it. I'm not free this weekend. Know that it's all recorded. More than 50% of people just view the recordings, and so they go through it, multiple times later on, and you get lifelong access to it. So I don't like take it away after 30 days. You just have it forever. Including all the bonus resources. So I do want to make sure that you're equipped moving forward, give you specific meditations to help with what we've gone through. During the retreat, we do a lot of different visualizations and meditations to drop into surrender. And then my tech person, Kelvin, he clips those, and you can re-listen to just those audios, and those can be really supportive as well. So there's a lot that you get as part of the retreat, and then you can find all of that on the resource page. But yeah, I just want to say this is it's a big topic, and it's one I'm really excited about, and it is for me in my own personal journey. The topic of surrender has really felt like the bridge between my deeper contemplative practice, living as a monk, going on retreats, doing work in isolation, and then bringing those insights into the world where it's just a hell of a lot messier. So if you're interested, I'll put the link here on this live version. If you're listening afterwards, you could just go to the link in my bio. The schedule can all be found at that link as well. And I do understand that sometimes finances could be a barrier. I try to price my programs appropriately, but I get that we're at different stages in our life at different times, and I've been there as well. So if you genuinely want to attend but you can't because it's just I literally don't have the resources for this, then you can reach out at Corey at limindfulness.com and just inquire about. We have some partial scholarships for those who wouldn't be able to attend otherwise. We'll make it work for you. Again, that is different than not wanting to invest in your own growth and your own well-being and taking that seriously. It is important to have a stake in that. But if it's just listen, I just don't have the resources, I can't do it, then please reach out. We'll make it happen. I'd love to have you there. That's all for now. We begin tomorrow, so there's about 24 hours left to sign up. And again, if you can't attend live, look forward to sharing it with you through the recordings. Thanks for tuning into this video, and please share your comments. I'll post it on my feed as well if you're watching the live version, and would love to hear how it lands for you. Take care, everyone. Lots of love.